website security team. My co-presenter is Andrew Shoemaker, who's the founder of Nimbus DDoS. Today's DDoS attacks are almost unrecognizable from the simple volumetric attacks that gave the technique its name. They are becoming more nuanced and subtle, and they could result in a lot more than a downed web server. The attackers have evolved and have the power to wreak significant damage, as all those affected by the TalkTalk and Carphone warehouse breaches last year in the United Kingdom. These attacks are far more sophisticated, deceptive, and frequent. They are no longer designed simply to deny service, but to deny security by acting as a camouflage to mask more sinister activities, usually data theft and network infiltration. Also known as the dark DDoS attack, these have the hallmark of a more sophisticated criminal. It takes some knowledge to engineer an attack while misdirecting the target with another. If performed well, it can yield impressive results by forcing administrators at the target company to alter their infrastructure as they struggle to address the traffic problems. Unlike traditional attacks, the dark DDoS attacker is unlikely to try and bring the target down altogether in a catastrophic flood of traffic. Taking the target offline would work against the attack. Instead, the characteristics of dark DDoS attacks often differ from big splash volumetric attacks that we sometimes see hitting companies. These are now often sub 1 gigabit per second attacks designed to generate a large number of events and effectively masking a different breach altogether. So, what do these attacks look like in practice and how easy are they? Let's have a look with our security speaker, Andrew Shoemaker today. Andy is a security industry veteran and the founder of Nimbus DDoS, a company that focuses on advanced DDoS attack testing. Andy has spent the last 15 years in operations world, primarily focused on massive scale consumer websites such as tripadvisor.com, and his other work experience includes online casino and poker companies, which you can expect to be the most frequent targets of DDoS attacks. Before I hand over the session to Andy, I just want to make you aware that this session is being recorded for those who haven't been able to attend today. And also, if you have any questions as we present, then please post them in the questions window, which is on the control panel of your webinar screen. This is not an interactive session, so if you have any questions, please post them onto the questions window, and we will answer them towards the end of the webinar. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Akil. And hello everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm Andy Shoemaker, the founder of Nimbus DDoS, and today I'm going to be guiding us through a simulated DDoS attack and defend scenario. Now, before we start, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the Nimbus DDoS testing platform. The platform uses public cloud resources to simulate a DDoS botnet. So by using a public cloud resource, we can create traffic volumes in excess of 100 gigabits per second. In addition to sending attack traffic, we also collect metrics data to monitor the performance of the target, and so that we can understand how attack is actually affecting the environment. Now, for today's demo, I won't be using our full attack platform, since I think it's going to be a little bit more interesting for a webinar setting to do things a little bit more interactively. If anyone does wish to see a demo of the full platform, please contact me and I'll be happy to arrange a demo. And throughout this webinar, if you have any other follow-on questions or you want to contact me, by all means email me or connect to me on LinkedIn. So an obvious question, why would an organization want to DDoS itself and to test DDoS attacks? This seems obviously a little bit bizarre because it will cause some downtime to your environment through the testing. But there's actually some really great reasons that most organizations choose to do this. The main reason is that it's about preparedness. So organizations are accustomed to doing penetration testing or vulnerability assessments, a DDoS simulation is basically serving the same function, but it's looking to identify areas of risk in the DDoS space within your environment rather than penetration or data theft opportunities. So the most obvious question, is my environment and organization susceptible to DDoS attacks? The short answer is that unless you're Amazon or Google, then you're definitely susceptible. So if you have a manager that thinks you might be too large to be susceptible to DDoS attacks, introduce them to me. I'll explain to them the realities of the DDoS landscape, because even very large companies and well-known brands are frequently targeted and affected by DDoS attacks. One of the more common reasons that we see for DDoS testing is to assess a vendor solution either pre-sales or after implementation. The idea here is that it doesn't make a lot of sense to purchase a solution and then you discover 3 months later during a real attack that it wasn't set up properly. So by doing a little bit of extra due diligence, you can prevent wasted money and time, and you can confirm that your solution is actually effective. This is most common, this use case, in people who use an on-premise mitigation solution. The other great thing about simulations is that it's a great way to train your IT staff. I think DDoS is unique for most organizations because they're relatively infrequent, but when they do happen, they're extremely damaging. So giving your IT team a place to become familiar with DDoS attacks can significantly reduce the time it takes to mitigate a real attack. The place for testing is not during a real event because there's a lot of chaos during a real event. And then lastly, one of the things that we've been seeing in the last year is a surge from companies who are being asked by their customers whether they have a DDoS strategy in place. In the modern infrastructure world where we rely on other vendors to provide key components of our infrastructure, it's not uncommon that we were dependent on these third parties. And one of the questions that a lot of companies are asking to SaaS vendors or financial services organizations is, do you have something in place? Am I protected if I use you? So we've been doing a lot with certification and validation for these scenarios. So anyway, let's move on to our actual test scenario. So for this scenario, we have our test company, which is Widgets LLC. There isn't anything too remarkable about them. They're just a mid-sized company that sells widgets, and their website is their primary marketing channel. Now, their technology stack also isn't terribly remarkable. It's just a WordPress site hosted on Amazon Web Services. And in response to a SYN flood that they had in the past, they've opted to protect their server by locating it behind Amazon's CDN service. Now, you'll see that this is an improvement over their previous setup, but as you're also going to see, they still can be targeted by DDoS attacks. And one item I want to call out, since they're located in Amazon, is that it's a frequent misconception that if you're in Amazon, you're protected against DDoS. And Amazon account representatives will tell you that DDoS attacks don't affect Amazon. As you're going to see in this demo, that's not the case. So let's take a look at the Widgets website really quickly. As you can all see, it's a very typical WordPress site. In fact, aside from the test article in the middle here that I posted, it's a stock AMI pulled from the Amazon Marketplace. So now let's take a little look at the web server that is behind this website. So in the top window, we can see the netstat output showing the listening ports on the server. So we can see that the server listens on SSH and then also on the web protocol ports for HTTP and HTTPS. And then in the bottom window, we can see the AWS security groups, which show that Amazon is blocking all traffic except HTTP and HTTPS, which is allowed from everywhere. And for those of you that are unfamiliar or new to Amazon Web Services, security groups are basically their equivalent to a packet filtering firewall. So now let's move on and meet our attacker. Now, attackers can range in capabilities from a single lone wolf on one end of the spectrum to organized crime or even nations at the other end. In our example today, our attacker is a lone wolf, and he makes his money by extorting people with DDoS attacks, and he protects himself by using Bitcoin to hide the transfer of money. Much like Widgets LLC, our attacker's capabilities are also fairly modest, with a very small botnet of just 50 nodes. But with that 50 nodes, he can launch attacks up to 5 gigabits per second and 5 million packets per second. I'm sure some of you probably look at these numbers and are wondering how your own infrastructure might stack up against this modest attacker. Now, to get a sense of the scale, consider that the Burrito Lab botnet launched a DDoS attack in 2010 using over 200,000 nodes. And according to some DDoS experts, in the first quarter of 2015, there were 25 attacks that exceeded 100 gigabits per second. So let's take another look at that Widgets website, but this time let's look at it in the shoes of our attacker. So to an attacker, a few things will often stand out. Primarily, they're interested in anything likely to be CPU intensive or that will hit a database. The reason for this is that the dynamic content specifically is more likely to pass through a CDN to the back-end servers, causing them to become overwhelmed. Generally speaking, an attacker will not target a resource hosted on a CDN, since it takes more resources to take a CDN offline than it would to take the back-end host offline. Another likely target is any non-CDN hosted content that is very large. So for instance, this image in the middle. The reason for this is obvious. In our example, each small HTTP request for that large image is going to result in the victim trying to send a 107K response back to the attack nodes. So if you do some quick math, it works out to be about 8.5 gigabits per second of traffic for an attack of just 10,000 requests per second. So how else do attackers find targets? One of my favorites is just the simple port scanner, which is almost ubiquitous in the security world. So a port scanner, for those not familiar, is simply a tool that allows an attacker to probe a network and get a list of what services are accessible from the internet. There's a variety of these tools available for free, many open source solutions, and if you aren't regularly using these as part of your own security audits, I would certainly recommend adding them in to help you identify your risk areas. One thing that I'd like to call out regarding the port scanners is the speed at which an attacker can scan a network. So with a single modest server, an attacker can easily scan an entire host in less than a second and an entire /16 network in 12 hours. And then there's even a tool called Mass Scan that claims to be able to scan the entire internet in under 6 minutes if you have a large enough network capacity. So to think that an attacker won't find something in your environment is probably a bit foolhardy. So what did the port scan of the Widgets network uncover? So the bad news for our attacker is that it discovered exactly what we would expect, with only the HTTP and HTTPS open, and you can see that highlighted here in blue. Furthermore, note that the item highlighted in red, which shows that the website is located behind Amazon's CDN. So that's what this CloudFront hostname is. That's Amazon's CDN. So what else can an attacker uncover? Let's take a look at the Widgets corporate DNS server. So in the top half of the command window, up here at the top, the attacker runs a DNS query to see what name servers are authoritative for the Widgets domain name. And you can see highlighted in blue that the result is dns.widgets.nimbusddos.com with an IP address of 52.8.85.195. And then if we look at the reverse DNS of that IP address, which is the second command down here, we can see highlighted in green that the target is an Amazon EC2 instance. And for those, again, that are unfamiliar with Amazon, EC2 is the name that they give to a virtual machine. So basically, the DNS server for this domain is a virtual machine in Amazon. So with all of this information that we've collected in just a few minutes, what attack vectors does this leave our attacker with? Now the good news for Widgets LLC is that many of the attacks that they were once susceptible to are no longer possible because their server is located behind a CDN. Before using a CDN, all of the items in red would have been successful in knocking them offline. Now the bad news is that there are still plenty of possible attack vectors. And I've only listed a few here, but the scope of DDoS attacks, there's likely thousands that this particular customer is susceptible to. I'm going to quickly go over each one of these main categories just so that you kind of understand how those fit into the scope of DDoS. So a bandwidth DDoS attack is generally the first type that an attacker will try. And the reason that they use this one so frequently is that its effect is pretty much universal and they're trivial to launch. So almost all organizations have a finite amount of network capacity. And it doesn't really matter how good your network equipment is if you saturate the physical circuit upstream of all the fancy firewall and IDS hardware. Now, if a bandwidth DDoS isn't effective, then an attacker will typically switch to a protocol attack like a SYN flood. A SYN flood is basically a large volume of the initial packets used for creating a network connection. And it tends to stress the network equipment such as the firewalls and the routers. And this is the attack that took them offline before, and it's the reason that they're located behind a CDN. And then lastly, we know that our target is susceptible to a variety of layer 7 attacks, such as HTTP and HTTPS request floods and potentially a DNS request flood. So in under 5 minutes, we identified 4 possible attack methods that can be used on the target. And as I mentioned, there's likely many more that are possible if the attacker did more investigation. So next I'm going to walk us through a live demo where I'll perform a UDP DNS request flood against the Widgets name server. In this attack, I'm going to be sending a large number of DNS requests to the DNS server hosted by Widgets. So let me switch over. These 4 windows that you see here, in the top left we have the attacker's window. The bottom is the DNS server that's our target. The bottom right is the target web server. And then this top right window, this is actually just my laptop connected on my business connection here at the office. So the first thing I wanted to show is the current state of the website. So if we go to the website, www.widgets.nimbusddos.com, and we try to load this, if we hit refresh a few times, you can see that it loads fairly quickly, maybe just a second or so to load. And we can hit that a few different times. If we go to our terminal window and we go to this top right, which is my laptop, if we run the curl command, so curl is basically a command line browser. So it will basically download the HTML document from the website. So if we run this, we can see that an HTML document is produced, and you can see the time it takes down at the bottom, and you can see that it's fairly quick. So that last one was 160 milliseconds. If we do that a few more times, 243, 162, it's fairly consistent and it's fairly quick. And then next, if we want to test the performance of our DNS server, if we go over to our DNS server window, I'll just start a packet capture here. And then from my laptop, I'm just going to use the dig command, which is a tool that's used for doing DNS queries. And if I do that, you can see in the packet capture, that's my request right there, and you can see that I sent the request and very quickly I got a response. And back on my laptop window, you can see again that there was a response nearly instantaneous. And if we do that a few times, you can see that each time we get a response and everything looks pretty good. Let me just shut that down. So at this point, we can see that all the systems are operating normally. There's no errors. Everything's working fine. No degradation. So what I'm going to do is now from the attacker window, I'm going to start the actual attack. And this command that I'm about to run, this is actually just a wrapper to some proprietary code that Nimbus DDoS uses as part of its testing platform. So I'm just going to go ahead and fire that off. So that's now running in the background. If we now go down to our target server, down to this DNS server down in the bottom left, we're going to now look at a packet capture again. This time I'm going to just limit it to the first 100 packets. And you can see that there's a large number of requests just came through, and they all pretty much look the same or very close to the same. And this is markedly different from the previous packet capture. And if we go to my laptop window in the top right, and let's say I run that same dig command that I ran before, we can see that we don't actually get a response anymore. So I'll just wait a moment there, and there's no response. So I'm just going to try it a few more times. It's possible that a request may end up sneaking through, but as you can tell, it's significantly degraded. And we'll just do a third request here, and again, it doesn't seem to be working. And then if we were to then run that curl command, we see very similar behavior, where I run the command and it just sits there waiting. And if we wait long enough, it'll eventually just time out. I'm just going to cancel that one, because as we know, most users don't wait very long for a website to load before they get frustrated and turn away. So just a few attempts here, and as you can see, it's no longer as fast as it once was. And as the final sort of proof, if we go to our web browser and we click on refresh, you can see it just keeps on spinning, and we never actually get our page loading. And we can do that a few times, and it never does anything. So next, I'm actually going to shut down this attack. This will just take a moment. The computer running the attack is actually a bit overwhelmed, I think, with the attack here, so I may not be able to actually shut this down. So this is the problem with a live demo. But let's just give this one more moment, and if it doesn't respond, then we'll just go ahead and proceed with the rest of the demo. Okay, so I don't think that's actually going to shut down. What I was going to show is that after the attack is shut down, there's still a oh, it just finished, it looks like. Okay, so it just finished doing the shutdown. Now if we go back to our windows here, if we go down to our DNS server and we look at the packet capture again, we'll see that there's some traffic going here, which is, I suspect, people on this webinar who are trying to load the web page. But it's nowhere near the volume of traffic that we saw during the attack. Now, the interesting thing to note is that if we go back to my laptop session up in the top right corner, and we do that dig request again, you'll see that it's still actually not working. And the reason for this is that the Linux kernel has basically been overwhelmed, and there's certain tables that get filled up, and what's happening is until those expire, the request won't succeed. So that'll actually take a few minutes to succeed, and we're not going to wait for that. We're just going to continue on. But if you were to check back on the website later on, say in 5 minutes, you will see that it will return back to normal. So anyway, let me switch back to my slide deck. Now that we've seen how easy it is to find weaknesses in an environment and how easy it is to launch an attack, how do we go about protecting ourselves? So the first reaction that most admins have is to block a DDoS attack at the network ingress points using a firewall or an IDS system. Now the challenge with this approach is that it's a substantial administrative burden, as it requires admins to become experts in DDoS attacks. Additionally, blocking that traffic once it's already traversed your internet circuits, it may not help. So the key to blocking any DDoS attack is to block the traffic before it reaches your network, as far upstream as possible. Now, if you live in the cloud, like our example company, you may be able to leverage the elasticity of the cloud to handle the DDoS traffic. So the recommended approach by Amazon engineers for dealing with a DDoS attack is to do exactly this, where you use the auto-scaling functionality of Amazon to add resources to handle the additional traffic. Now, the challenge with this is that most cloud scaling strategies are not instantaneous. So as you scale up resources to handle the traffic, it may take hours for those additional resources to come online and start handling that traffic, because it takes a finite amount of time to create the virtual machines and to start handling traffic. And then additionally, it may not even be possible with some applications to scale up in this manner. The most common scenario is monolithic relational databases, where if the database is what's being targeted, then your ability to scale is often limited because there's no horizontal scaling strategy in most database platforms. And then, of course, eventually somebody has to pay the bill for these scale-out resources. So even though you create all these resources to handle all the additional traffic, you still end up being forced to pay a very large Amazon bill for all the resources that you had to create. Now, another common approach that I see fairly regularly is that people will purchase an on-premise DDoS mitigation device. Just like with the firewall or IDS filtering, this approach requires that you have in-house DDoS expertise. And then also it requires that you have the network capacity sufficient to handle the volume of DDoS attack traffic. Again, as a reminder, blocking a DDoS attack once it's traversed your internet circuit, it's not very effective. You need to do that upstream. Now, a clever solution that the example company used to partial effect is to hide behind a CDN. Now, since a CDN is basically a large proxy on a very large network, you can basically use their resources to protect yourself against most bandwidth and protocol attacks. Now, the big caveat, as we saw in our test example, is that it won't help you against a layer 7 attack unless the CDN specifically offers some DDoS mitigation service along with their CDN offering. Another option that we see somewhat regularly is that ISPs are starting to offer what they call clean pipes services to help protect their customers. Since the protection is upstream of the target, it can be effective, but there's a big caveat in that it only protects the traffic passing through that ISP. So if you have multiple network connections from multiple ISPs, you still could be exposed through those other links that might not have clean pipe services. And of course, since each ISP implements protection differently, even if all of your circuits have clean pipes, the quality of the protection may not be consistent across them. And then the last comment I'd have about the clean pipes is that these services typically do poorly against layer 7 attacks, especially those using HTTPS. And that's primarily because these are low volume attacks, and also they're encrypted, so it's very difficult for them to know what's going on in the data stream. Now the last two options are what I would consider the best approach for most organizations. This is to use a dedicated DDoS scrubbing service to filter the traffic on their network before it reaches your network. These services are usually offered in two flavors. One is the proxy solution that anybody can use, and then the other is a BGP-based solution for those who use BGP. If you have the option, I would use the BGP solution as it's much more complete and it can fully protect the backend servers. The services provided by my co-presenters from Symantec, they fall into these last two categories, where they're providing a dedicated DDoS mitigation on top of a CDN platform. Now, this is a ton of information, and it's probably a little bit overwhelming. So, where do you start to become DDoS prepared? So from my perspective, the starting point is to first understand the DDoS risk areas within your environment. This is done by reviewing the environment with the mindset of a potential attacker. Now, this isn't unlike what we did today, but it's much more exhaustive, covering all the IT resources, including third parties that provide critical services. So this isn't a vulnerability scan, but it basically serves the same function, but with a focus on DDoS. Now, once the risk assessment is complete, the data that's collected should be validated with simulated DDoS attacks. The idea is that these simulations will help determine the exact impact of an attack targeting each of the risk areas. And it also will take what may be a hypothetical risk and make it more concrete by collecting performance data and other metrics. So with all of this setup work complete, all of the data can then be boiled down to craft and implement a DDoS mitigation strategy. The data collected can help make intelligent choices about which mitigation solution to use and how it might be implemented to most effectively protect the environment. And then as a final wrap-up to the whole preparedness lifecycle, I also recommend ongoing training and periodic retesting of the environment. I've personally never worked in an environment that was static, and it's this dynamic nature of IT organizations that tends to introduce new risk areas. So something as simple as a code change may introduce a new DDoS attack vector. And to stay ahead of these new risks, a business needs to be proactive with their DDoS preparedness. And then, of course, as you might have guessed, Nimbus DDoS and Symantec can help out with many of these areas that we discussed above. So if you have any questions or want to discuss them, by all means, reach out to myself or Akil. And so that is my time, everyone. So I want to thank you. I'm going to turn the stage back over to Akil. And please, if anyone has any following questions, by all means, reach out to me either through email or connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you all.
Thanks, Andy. And as Andy was saying, if you have any questions, you could reach out to us, or you could actually post your questions through the control panel on GoToWebinar control screen, and we can get to those questions in this session. Yes, it is a lot of information, as Andy mentioned, so please make sure that you get all your clarifications today during the webinar. So, in terms of the security challenges, we know that it's an ever-changing threat landscape, and as we saw how easy it is to launch DDoS attacks, which makes resourcing your security more and more challenging. We know that website security is ultimately about confidence. Generating this trust requires a realistic understanding of the dangers faced and an accurate assessment of the capabilities needed to counter them. Yet the biggest threat is arguably the limited resources typically dedicated to website security. Plus a reliance on manual processes that, combined with time pressure, makes even the simplest security task difficult to achieve. Since attackers are adopting diverse strategies and finding multiple ways to get into your network, you need to be looking for a trusted partner with expertise and diverse solution that can plug every potential vulnerability in your infrastructure. We know that the threat for DDoS and dark DDoS are ever increasing. What organizations also need to be aware of are the adjacent threats to their website presence, especially if doing online transactions. The questions you need to ask yourself are, is your website fully encrypted with highest level of certificate security provided by Extended Validation certificates? Do you perform regular vulnerability assessments? Do you have a way to discover and automate renewals of your existing web certificates? There may be expired or rogue certificates within your network, which, if not discovered, could lead to substantial damages to your data. Do you have a solution for malware scanning that helps you identify and remedy risks before they become critical? Do you have a web application firewall to protect your web-connected applications and prevent any layer 7 attacks? Are you able to assure your customers and site visitors that their data is protected? Something like a Norton Secure Seal reiterates a message and promotes your online transactions. So these are some of the questions which I would ask if I was managing the security, my website security, and these are the questions you need to bear in mind, plus all the information that Andy shared with you during the webinar. And I hope some of these would help you make a decision in terms of how robust and how good your DDoS protection and mitigation platform is. So that brings us to an end of the presentation part of this webinar. I would now open up the webinar for a few questions, and we have some here which I would post to Andy. So first question for you, Andy, is how do cloud-based solutions compare to on-premises appliance solutions? I know you touched upon it a tiny bit in your slides, but if you can elaborate a bit more, that will be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So, from my perspective, I think the main deficiency of on-premise appliances is that they don't really help you against large volumetric attacks. So, a cloud-based solution, the great thing about those is that they have a near limitless capacity to handle attacks. So, regardless of whether it's a 100 gigabit attack or a 400 gigabit attack, the cloud solution can handle that, whereas your on-premise solution might not be able to. And the other great thing about the cloud solution is that it scales with the DDoS landscape. So, when you buy an on-premise solution, that may work today, but as the DDoS landscape changes, or as your business changes, or as your network connectivity changes, you may have to completely replace that device. Whereas with a cloud solution, the cloud architecture is expanding to meet those threats.
Okay, great, Andy. Thanks very much. The other question I have is about the web application firewall that also we spoke about. The question is a web application firewall needed if there is a DDoS solution in place?
Yeah, so I think in my opinion, the answer is definitely a yes. So there's some overlap between web application firewalls and DDoS mitigation solutions. So I think a lot of times people get confused that they're one and the same, where one can solve a problem so why have two solutions that do the same thing? However, the reality is that they fall in different areas of information security. So a WAF is primarily geared towards preventing vulnerability exploits. So things like SQL injection attacks, Stack Overflow attempts, things like that. So it's really targeted towards the items where people are attempting to either gain access or steal data. On the other hand, a DDoS solution is really more focused on resource exhaustion, such as doing a request flood and so forth. Now, like I said, there is a little bit of overlap between the two because there are certain types of attacks, like penetration attacks and vulnerability attacks, that also can function as a DDoS attack as well. So there is a little bit of a fuzzy area there, but they are two distinct solutions, and I would argue that they're both necessary for a fully protected environment.
All right, great. And I think we can take one more question at this time. So if there is a victim of a DDoS attack, is there a way or a solution in place that the victim can track down who the DDoS attacker has been?
So, you know, having been involved in the DDoS space for, I guess, probably about 20 years now, you know, that question kind of keeps coming up, and as the target of the attack, it's very difficult to actually identify a specific person or group. And the primary reason for this is that most attacks are originating from forged and randomized source IP addresses. Now, there have been successful prosecutions and identification of attackers, but most of those have come from police organizations who have infiltrated hacking groups and other groups of cyber criminals, and they've basically tracked them down through other channels where they've found people either bragging about their you know, their abilities or what have you. And I think one of the other things that really just makes this a very difficult endeavor is that DDoS attacks, especially botnet-based DDoS attacks, they often cross multiple international borders. So you might have the attack nodes that are scattered all throughout the globe, you know, possibly in jurisdictions that are sheltering those attackers, and then the actual person who's responsible for pulling the trigger, that's running the command and control system, they might be in yet another country entirely. So even if you were to track it down to a specific real IP address, it's still might not get any traction with actually identifying a real person.
Indeed, indeed. So that's all we have time for today. And to the attendees, if you have any further questions or if you have any comments, you could reach out to either of us. Plus, there is an email address in the invites that you received. So questions, comments, feedback are most welcome. That will help us tailor our next presentation for you in a much better way. So thank you, Andy, for the presentation, and thank you, everyone, for taking the time to attend this webinar. We really appreciate your attendance, and have a great day. Thanks very much.